Hello, this is Takane with Warframe Breakdown, where we break down Warframe so you can be broken in Warframe. Today we're going to go over critical chance and critical damage. Every weapon in the game that has critical damage and critical chance stats have a chance of randomly dealing critical damage just by firing/striking the enemy. There are several ways of increasing your critical chance. You can increase your critical chance with Harrow's Fourth, Kavats, Adrazas, Smitas alike, Volt Shields, and various different weapons. Critical hits against health are going to be displayed in three colors: yellow, orange, and red. Critical hits can still be applied to enemies with shields, but the color does not change between whether or not it's a critical hit or if it's a regular base damage. It will just be displayed in the color of the type of shield, whether it be an overshield or whether it be just a regular shield. Overshields, critical hits will be displayed in purple. In regular shields, it'll be just displayed in blue. White colors are not critical hits. That's just where the base damage is just applied. Critical chance scales with every 100%. Every 100% is also considered a tier, and each additional tier that the critical chances increase by deals additional critical damage. So for an example, we have yellow crits indicates that it's going to be the very first tier, orange crits indicates that it's the second tier, and red crits indicate that it's tier 3 and higher. It is possible to get higher than tier 3. You can get a tier 4, tier 5, tier 6. It's just that there's no distinction between those tiers once you've passed that third tier. For an example, if a weapon has a critical chance of 10%, 1 out of every 10 shots will be a yellow crit or a tier 1 crit, and the critical multiplier will be applied to the weapon once as it makes that critical shot and just that shot alone. If a weapon has a critical chance of 110%, every shot will be a yellow crit, where the minimum critical multiplier will always be applied. Additionally, it will have a 1 out of 10 on average strikes to be an orange crit, where the critical multiplier will be applied twice. Critical multipliers can be modified by mods inside of your arsenal, and they can also be added depending on where you're shooting the enemy. If you shoot as an example, if you shoot the enemy in the head, you will actually get a 2.0 critical multiplier in addition to whatever your critical multiplier is, and it will also immediately grant you a tier 1 crit. This isn't the same for every enemy. Some enemies, like the Corpus Crewman, you can shoot them in the head as many times as you possibly want, but you'll never crit because they don't have any additional bonuses when you shoot the Corpus Crewman in the head, whether or not you pop off the helmet or not. In order to understand how to get higher damage in higher tiers, we have to understand how mods get applied to our weapons. There are two types of mods: additive mods and multiplicative mods, also known as absolute and relative, respectively. Absolute mods have a percent listed that directly adds to the percent of the weapon. For an example, would be like Cat's Eye. Multiplicative mods, we take that percentage, we turn it into a decimal, and then we take that decimal, we times it by our percent stat, and then we get a resultant value, and then we take that resultant value and then add that to whatever our base mods is. So for an example, we'll take here Point Strike. We'll go ahead, we're gonna slap that on here, and it's 150%, so 150% times our critical chance base of 12%. When we apply that, we'll get a value, and then it will be 18%, and then we take that 18%, we add it in, and then we get 30% by adding as a grand total for our critical chance for our Brat and Prime. Another example here would be like Vital Sense. Vital Sense increases our critical damage. When we take Vital Sense, it is 120%. We turn that in decimal, or 1.2. We take 1.2 and we times it by our base of 2.0, and we get a value of 2.4. We take 2.4 and we add that to our base value to get a grand total of 4.4. Some mods don't always show the values that we get because they're conditional mods. One example of a conditional mod would be like Argon Scope. Argon Scope, the conditions in order for us to even get the critical chance is we have to shoot the enemy in the head and then we have to be zooming in for the next 9 seconds to gain the 135% critical chance. As you can see, when we are applying it here, we don't see that value immediately added in, so we're not seeing the benefit of having that mod equipped, because when we're looking in our arsenal and we have our mods here, it's only going to show us for every single instance. It's not going to show us for conditional instances like our Argon scope. In order to find our critical damage our critical damage that we're applying to our enemy, what we can do is we have a simple formula: 1 plus a critical tier times the critical damage multiply minus 1. As an example, the Bratton Prime with 110% critical chance with Vital Sense, we have a 1 plus 1 times 1 plus 1.2 minus 1. If we were to take all those values and we were just plug and chug, go right across, we'd get 2 times 1.2, and then we'd get our grand total of 2.4 as our critical damage multiplier. The damage multiplied to the base is quantified. If you remember from our previous episode, that means if we take any stats that are changing our base, what we have to do is we have to times it individually to each individual stat, and then depending on the enemy we go up against, we multiply in their variable resistances and weaknesses, and we multiply those into our base stats, and then we add up the grand total of impact, slash, and puncture. So in our previous episode, we determined that the Bratton Prime had a quantified value of 2.19375 for impact, and then we had a quantified value for puncture of 13.1625, and then a quantified value of slash of 21.9375. We multiply our critical damage multiplier into each one, and that would get us for impact a 5.265, for puncture a 31.59, and for slash a 52.65. So if we were to take, for an example, and we were trying to see how much critical damage we were dealing up against, say, our infested friend, like we did from last time, what we would do is we would take all of our stats and we would just line them up like we did before, and then against infested, we get a 25% damage bonus to slash. So what we do is we take 5.265, we'd add it to 31.59, and then we would add the quantified value of 52.65 times 1.25, which is our 25%, and that would get us a grand total of 102.66. And in the game, like we said before, we just round up to the nearest whole integer, and that would get us 103 displayed damage. So, as I've gone throughout the Origin system, I've come across a lot of players that have the misconception that fire rate actually increases your critical chance. So what I have here is we're going to break down DPS in terms of critical chance and critical damage, so that we'll be given 3 equations, and these 3 equations, what they'll show us is they'll show us how fire rate affects damage per second as you increase it, how critical damage affects damage per second as you increase it, and how critical chance increases damage per second as it increases. So the very first equation that we have here, we're just taking right from our previous notes, where we just take the total damage, our total damage in terms of fire rate. It's just going to be that equation times our fire rate. So our total damage was our base damage, 3.51, times our critical damage multiplier, times our status chance. And that just yielded us a grand total of 70.24 times our critical chance. So one thing to note here is that if we're looking at it in terms of DPS, we're looking at it as we're firing, there's going to be a percent of our chance that's going to be critical damage, and there's going to be percent of the time when we're just doing our base damage. So in order to properly calculate this in, we take our critical damage, our 70.24, and then we're going to multiply it by 12 divided by 100. And that's going to get us a value that is going to be percent of the time that is going to be our critical damages that we're dealing. So for the Bratton Prime, it's 35.1 times our 2, giving us 70.24, and then 12 out of 100 shots on average is going to be our critical damage, and that's going to yield us 8.4288 damage per second. Now we have to add this in to our DPS to the time that we're not critting, which is going to be the times that don't have the critical chance applied of that 12%. So we just take 100, we subtract the 12, and that's going to give us 88. So we take 88 divided by 100 and then just apply it to our base with no critical damage multiplier applied in. So it's just going to be 35.1 times our 88 divided by 100, and then we add that to our 70.24 times our 12 divided by 100, and then we just plug and chug, and that's going to give us a grand total of 39.3168. And then we multiply, and then because we're trying to see how fire rate increases and changes our damage per second, we're just going to leave fire rate as a variable. We know that the Branton Prime has a 9.58, but we're just trying to see how it differs from critical damage and critical chance. So f of x will be 39.3168. So now for our critical damage, what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing, only so we're going to create critical damage as the variable. So all that we're doing is we're going back to the previous equation, and we're taking 35.1, and then we're going to times it by x times 12 divided by 100. And that's all we're flipping. And then instead of doing x as a variable for fire rate and seeing how that changes DPS, we got to leave that as a constant because we're not changing that. We're going to leave that at just 9.58. And so if we just plug and chug, we're going to get our equation to be 295.8304 plus 40.35096 times x. So our g of x will be 295.8304 plus 40.35096 times x. So for critical chance, it's a little bit trickier. We just have to be very, very careful when we're calculating in our numbers here. So for critical chance, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to list all of our knowns, and then we're going to look at our unknown, and then we're going to leave that unknown as the variable. So what we're trying to evaluate is we're trying to evaluate critical chance, and so we're going to leave that as our variable x. Our critical damage is going to be a 2.0. Our damage per second is going to be a function of x, so we'll call it h of x. And then our fire rate will be 9.58 shots per second. So our DPS is going to be the sum of the average of all of our damages times our fire rate. And so if you haven't figured out by now, critical chance is going to be a piecewise function, and the reason why it's a piecewise function is because it has tiers. Every single tier you get an added bonus damage. So between 0 and 100 critical chance, our function of x will be 35.1 times 100 minus x, because we're putting the critical chance as a variable divided by 100, and this 100 minus x will be the time we're not receiving that critical chance bonus. And then we're going to add 2 times x divided by 100. This will be the time that we're not receiving, or that we are receiving our critical damage bonus from the next tier. Between 100 and 200, our function of x will be 35.1 times 70.24. If you notice that the 70.24 is the critical damage that we receive every single time we're critting above 100%. And then we get, this will be the time that we are getting just that bonus, 100 minus x divided by 100, plus our critical damage multiplier for the next tier, 2 to the power of 2 times x divided by 100, where 2 is our critical damage multiplier, and we're putting it to the power 2 because we get it twice. And then for when x is between 200 and 300%, our function of x will be 35.1 times 140.2. Don't know if you're seeing a pattern there, but 140.4 is 2 times 70.2. And that time we're receiving that buff is going to be 100 minus x divided by 100, and that's going to be added to our critical damage multiplier to the power of 3 times x divided by 100. And between 300 and 400, we're doing the same thing. It's just now 280.8. Between 400 and 500, we could keep on going on and on and on. So whereas 100 minus X divided by 100 is percent of the shots where the base damage, just the base damage at that tier is applied, and where 2 is going to be our critical damage multiplier, and 3.5 is our base damage, and X is our critical chance variable. And so, because it's a piecewise function, what we can do is the variables that are changing, we can substitute for a value called N. And we can argue that N is going to be equal to the nearest whole integer of X divided by 100. And so, if it's the nearest whole integer, that means N is going to be equal to the floor of X divided by 100. And that's going to be the function we're going to use. And the floor just means that the whole integer is when the critical chance divided by 100 is not a whole number. This allows us to calculate how critical chance changes the damage, and this per second. When we rewrite the piecewise function, it's going to be a summation as X approaches infinity. So that means that we can take this means that the critical damage cannot be 1. It has to be a value over 1. So what we have to do is we have to take our floor of X divided by 100, and we have to substitute it in for all of our exponents to our critical damage multipliers. So that would yield us the equation of 35.1 times 9.58 times 100 minus X divided by 100 times 2 to the power of the floor of X divided by 100 minus 1. That whole value will be the time period that we are not receiving the damage buff, and we're just receiving the lowest tier damage buff to our critical damage. And then we will add in 9.58 times 35.1 times X divided by 100 times 2 to the power of the floor of X divided by 100. And that will be the value that we are actually receiving the higher tier critical damage. And this equation will give us the total DPS of any instant as the critical chance just increases. So what we can do with this to properly evaluate how each of these are being applied, we got to even see if any of these are absolutely feasible. So if you look at the equations here and you look at how they're on the graph, we see that we get a lot of that damage per second, and critical damage does the most for increasing our DPS. But if we were to see if we could even get to 100 fire rate, let's say we throw on every single fire rate mod that we have. So I have Speed Trigger, we have Shred, we have Vigilante Fever. If we were to we can throw on a Riven. Let's just see if it's even possible to even get our DPS to even be up to 100. But as you can see, we're going through just even my mod set here, and we're just looking through every single one. We're not quite getting all the way up there, and we're going to be consuming a lot of slots to try to throw on every single fire rate mod on to try to get our fire rate all the way up there to be over 100. Yeah, it does a whole lot for it. We're even throwing in conditional mods like where we zoom in, but as you can see, we've already wasted 5 spots to try to get our fire rate all the way up there, and we just aren't getting 100 fire rate, even on our Branton Prime. So we have to see if it's even feasible. If we can't get a fire rate of 100, it's probably not going to be very feasible to actually try to assume every single value after 100 is even possible, and that is going to do the most for us. So we'll compare that to critical damage. The highest critical damage weapon inside of all of Warframe is the New Core. The New Core has a critical damage of 4.0. A 4.0, again, every single critical damage mod we're going to throw on, a critical damage mod is going to give us it's just we got to take a percentage of it, multiply it in, and then add it in. It comes in very small increments. So let's go ahead and throw on all of our critical damage multipliers to see what we can get. So we'll throw on a hammer shot. We'll throw on bladed rounds, a conditional mod, like while we're zooming in. We'll throw on, let's see, we should have another mod around here for critical damage. It's Vital Sense, of course. throw Vital Sense on, and as you can see, we're getting about 5, and you can say with bladed rounds zooming in, we're getting about 6, but to just get up to 100 critical damage, it's just not a realistic expectation for you as a player to dedicate every single one of your mod spots to try to get to 100 critical damage. However, if we mod it for critical chance, there's a few mods here that just give us 100% critical chance just straight off the bat. Another thing you can think of it is, even if we were to look at critical chance, and so just right here, just modding for it, we can get above 100% critical chance. We'll throw on Ever Vigilante mod, we'll throw on Argon Scope, we'll throw on Vigilante Fever, and these mods in combination will give us 100% critical chance more often than we can get 100 critical damage or 100 fire rate. With that being said, 100% critical chance is going to yield us anywhere between 100 to 200 at 100% critical chance, which is going to yield us those tiers of values. And if you notice, those values are almost 12 to 20,000 more than what we'd get by even trying to attempt to get to the 100 spot in critical damage and fire rate. So just when you're going throughout modding and you're looking at all of these, it's just very important to note that when you do create these graphs and you do say damage per second is heavily influenced by fire rate, the next question you got to ask is, getting to that point where it is highly influenced, is that even possible to say so? Or can I go an alternate route and I can rely on other things to actually get my critical chance higher, my critical damage? Or is there a way that I can do buff stacking amongst my items to actually get myself up to those higher tiers? And that's the most important part of concept in Warframe, is buff stacking, where you get stacked buffs from allies, from buddies, and even from your own weapons and your arsenals. Abilities have a way of stacking themselves on each other. Excellent. So now let's show what we've been talking about this entire time. So so we've got these equations in. Now let's show that they exist. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to throw in our Kavat, and we're going to show you that this is what the mod for Cat's Eye is. It's for the Adraza Kavat. Another mod that we're going to throw on here is going to be Tech Enhanced. Now, this is kind of a nice mod because it actually just increases the duration of Cat's Eye. Cat's Eye gives us a 60% additive critical chance every 20 seconds for 10 seconds. That Tech Enhanced increases it to 13 seconds. Just kind of a nice little buff. So, as you can see, our critical chance here with these three mods is underneath 100%. And so you're going to see that as we're firing this, if our theories are correct and our fire rate does not increase critical chance, we should see white and yellow. If fire rate does increase critical chance, we should probably only see yellow then. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to spawn in 20 chargers to show that we were both getting white. Fire rate isn't increasing our critical chance, and that as it's underneath 100, that there is going to be underneath. So even though we're hitting them in the head, we're still getting some tier 1 crits. We're not getting any orange crits. We're not getting any red crits, which we would see. And we're also still getting white values from when we're not hitting the enemy inside the head. So we're going to go ahead. We'll go back. We'll switch out this weapon here. And now, according to our theory and according to our rules, as soon as we pass that 100% critical chance, every single shot that we make will be a yellow crit, and then we'll also start seeing orange crits as our critical chance is between 100 and 200%. So we're going to come in here with the Ruko Prime. As you can see, we have 113 critical chance. So that means every single shot we make on this weapon will be a yellow crit, and we have a possibility for getting orange crits. So we'll go ahead, we'll bring that in, as well as we'll spawn in our 20 chargers just as a demonstration. We'll go ahead and we'll zoom in here. We're going to fire once. Yellow. Tier 1 crit. Tier 1 crit. Tier 2 crit. Look at that. Orange. Tier 1 crit. Tier 2 crit. Tier 1 crit, Tier 2 crit. So as you can see, we're getting, and our cat's eye is proxying, so that's why we're getting Tier 2 crits a little bit more often. That buff is indicated in the top right hand corner there. So just in case that we were giving ourselves additional buffs, we'll just go ahead and we'll just fire point blank right here. As you can see, we're still only getting Tier 1 and Tier 2 crits. We are not getting anything less than a Tier 1 crit when we're actually damaging the enemy here. So as you can see, it's very beneficial. So another thing that we talked about earlier was that since we know that this weapon is going to be critting with every single shot, another thing we talked about is that the critical hits do still apply just to shielded enemies, whether they have overshields or just regular shields. So we know this weapon crits every single time. We're going to go ahead and spawn in an overshield enemy. The one that I know that guarantees to have an overshield is going to be this arachnoid here. We're going to spawn in just one of those bad mamma jammas. Usually spawn in about like level 40. So we'll crank it up a little bit there to level 40. Now, because this is an unmodded Warframe, I will die. It's going up against a level 40 enemy with a regular Excalibur with no mods equipped. I will die. But we're going to just do this for demonstration, just to show you that crit weapons do not change color when we're dealing damage against shielded and overshielded enemies. So we'll just get him have his shields. As you can see, we shot and we only got blue damage numbers come up. Even though we're critting every single time, it's just a standard blue set of numbers. Blue numbers, we're going to try to get him to activate his overshields. Now the interesting thing about this arachnoid is when you do enough damage to his shields, he will activate his overshields, and then you'll have to take those down, and then you'll have to take down his regular shields in order to get to his health, and then you can start damaging his health. So crit there, and as you can see, it was just in purple. That weapon also does crit, and as you can see, it was also in purple. Oh, and I just died there. There we go. So now we're just gonna take him down because it's a lot more fun than having the game kill him. So here he comes. He does go invisible, and he does have a tendency to run away like that. He's a little bit of a pussy, but he'll just keep on killing me just like that. And you see lots of purple hits. Oh, now we got rid of his overshields. So now it's just a matter of time of just killing him. So now you're going to notice that as soon as his shields are gone, we're no longer getting purple. But see how we're still getting those orange numbers? We've been critting this entire time, and we've still been getting all that damage. It's just he has had his shields, and so the color just hasn't changed for us to indicate that we actually were getting tier 2 crits and everything. And there he goes. Now he's dead. Perfect. So now we're going to do something a little bit unconventional. Now that you know that critical chance scales for every 100%, what we're going to do is we're going to apply these concepts with fire rate, critical damage, and critical chance. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the suckiest, I'd argue probably some of the suckiest weapons inside the game, and we're going to try to break them. And we're going to use these principles of using additional buffs outside of the weapon and outside of modding to try to get those results. So what we're going to do is, I had mentioned earlier that Harrow's Fourth does give 50% additive crit, so we're going to bring in a Harrow. And we're going to make sure that we have a good build on him. So we have Vigor Swap, which gives us 165% base damage when we do switch between weapons. That's going to be a very key indicator for what we're going to be doing, but we're just going to increase that ability duration. That way we crit we have his critical chance for a little bit longer, just enough so that when our cat's eye procs, we'll also have that as well. So we're going to switch out our primary weapon to this Mutalisque Quanta. And I just wanted to show you these weapons, and we'll also switch out the secondary here. We'll switch out the secondary to the new core. I'd mentioned earlier that the new core does have the highest critical damage as a 4.0, but what we're actually giving that critical damage to is a very pitiful and very small amount of 22 radiation. 22 is not a whole lot of damage, and with that critical chance of only 3%, we're never going to get there. We're never going to get there according to our charts that we came up. It's just no way of actually being able to get our buffs the way we want. And as you can see, just most of these weapons that we're going across, it's green all the way across the board. Just you can see that the new core, if you look at the basic stats, doesn't seem to be that great of a weapon. Yeah, it's got a great critical damage, but why on earth would you have it? And with this Mutalisque Quanta, it seems even dumber to equip as a primary weapon, that it just doesn't seem like something you'd want to have. It's very, very low base damage, just as low as critical chance. And it even has, for its secondary alt fire, a 0% status chance. Who on earth would want a weapon with a 0% status chance? Just all these weapons are just usually green across the board and a lot better. But we're going to show you just how sucky they are, and then we're going to show what you can do with the weapons by manipulating critical chance and critical damage. Excellent. So these stats are all unmodded. As you can see, 1.5 critical damage. We got all of our base stats, not very high status chance or critical chance. And then we also have for that alt fire a 0% status chance. For the new core, we can see we have the highest critical damage, that 4.0, and that weak 3% critical chance, and then of course our base damage is nothing. So we're going to go into the mission. I'm just going to show you how little damage these items really do against an enemy. To add insult to injury, we're going to spawn in a level 160 heavy gunner, and we're gonna try to be good. We're gonna try to get some energy. We're gonna try to attempt to be a little decent here. So we're gonna come in here. We're gonna go ahead, and we're firing. Whew! A whomping 4. Woo! And then we'll switch to the new core. Ooh, see, not a whole lot of damage. We'll get just instantaneously die. We got slaughtered. These weapons really didn't do us a whole lot of good. So we'll go ahead, we'll kill that enemy. And we're going to be really, really dumb here. And we're going to waste our time, and we're going to dump 4 formas into these weapons. And with this Mutalisque Quanta, we're just going to build how like we normally would build any weapon. And then for the new core here, this is where it's interesting. We did not dump anything on status chance. We left status chance as it was. It is dumb to do anything with status chance with the new core, or critical chance and status chance with the new core, because you're not going to, that's not where your damage output is going to be. It's going to be in your critical damage multiplier. So we're going to crank that sucker through the roof. We're going to throw on sharpened bullets. We're going to throw on magnum force to try to get our base damage up. We're going to throw on primed target cracker. And with our Mutalisque Quanta, we got a Riven there, and we're just going to come on in. And we'll spawn this heavy gunner in, and let's see what happens. Grab some energy there. Okay. Now, one thing I want you to notice is I'm going to use the alt fire here. The alt fire will give us giant big bubbles here. And so there's a whole bunch of big bubbles, and if you notice, that heavy gunner is getting status chanced. But this weapon has that fire has a 0% status chance, so how on earth are we getting that high status chance? And then within seconds, the guy is gone. So the one thing that is important to note here that we didn't mention before, even though these weapons kind of suck, if you don't know how to use the weapons, these weapons don't do you a whole lot of good. But when you do them in combination and you do an ability stack buff, these weapons are the greatest weapons almost nearly on the planet. So even though we said that we had a 0% status chance, the reason why it says 0% the reason why it said 0% status chance there is because the weapon actually has the 100% status chance. So if you were to equip a status chance mod, in Warframe, you can't go higher than 100% status chance because you're already getting the things to proc. So adding status chance mods is not good at all. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and please give it a share. If you want to see more videos like this, you can go ahead and follow our channel. Again, it is Warframe Breakdown. And continue to go into the game and continue to break Warframe. Bye, guys.